Hey, Shalom Akim. First and foremost, want to begin by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, by Hashem Yahweh Shai. Double honors to the head apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Also want to say Shalom, much due honors and respect to all you brothers laboring in his work, pushing out this gospel in all truth, faith, and sincerity. Yeah, so it's the brother Aram, GMS Blow the Trumpet 7 camp, the church in Birmingham, Alabama. And I wanted to get into another quick lesson, all right? Pretty much centered around the serpent that you read about in Genesis, the 3rd chapter. The serpent in the garden is pretty much the same character or figure as the dragon in the wilderness that you read about in Revelation, the 12th chapter, which is both symbolic to the so-called white man, all right? And the Heavenly Father, you know, and his beloved Son in their infinite wisdom, they chose to write this in a parable. You know, they chose to distribute the scriptures out in a hidden form, you know, a hidden encrypted code. Why? Because if not, the so-called white man would have destroyed the Bible, man. And this is not a hard concept to digest if you got a feel for history. Because when you go into history, there was plenty of groups that arose that looked to destroy the Bible. In fact, there was an actual group called the Bible Destruction Group. You know? Hey, even this guy Adolf Hitler, which was fairly an intelligent man, all right, was a pretty smart guy, all right. He sought out destroying the Bible. Why? Because he understood that the so-called white man, true biblical nationality, was the nation of Edom, the people of whom the Lord had an indignation with forever, all right. He also understood the fact that those people who was calling themselves the Jews was imposters, man. He even went as far as deeming the true Jews as the Oriental Negroes, all right? Which that word Oriental mean the Eastern Negroes, because that's where we came from, the East, all right? So yeah, it was a method to the Lord using certain symbols and buzzwords when describing the so-called white man, because the white man was already foretold to come into power. And by knowing that, the Lord in his infinite wisdom knew that this devil had the power in his hand to destroy the Bible, which the Lord wrote it in code for the Bible's preservation, for the Bible to be preserved for the very times that we're in now, all right? So with no further ado, I just want to go right into it. This is the book of Genesis, chapter 3, starting at verse 1. Now the serpent was more subtile than any beast of the field, which the Lord power had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, have the Most High said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden. Right, so those are the unlearned would read this scripture at face value, and immediately the animal kingdom will come to mind, because they don't understand this is a parable, man. This is a riddle, all right? They would read this and come to the conclusion that a serpent or a snake is more cunning or shrewd than an elephant or a lion or a bear, when this is not what the scriptures is talking about. The serpent is referring to the so-called white man, and the beast of the field is dealing with all the other nations, such as the Arabs, the so-called Arabs and Chinese, Japanese, so-called Africans and Eastern Indians, all right? Well, the so-called white man indeed is more shrewd and more subtle than any of the other nations in the field. Now, the key word to look at, which pretty much is a stumbling block for people that really throw people off, is that word field. Because when you see that word field, the first thing come to mind is the jungle or the forest. Well, that word field is symbolic for the world, all right? Now, to prove that, you get the book of Matthew, chapter 13, and verse 38. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. Yeah, so this is the Lord Yahweh Shai, who the world ignorantly called Jesus Christ. This is him speaking. You notice the red letters, and he's giving you an inside track on what the that word field means. So again, it says the field is the world. So when you go back to the book of Genesis, chapter 3, and verse 1, when it says, now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field, in reality it's saying the so-called white man was more subtle than any other nation in the world, all right? So it says, let's read it again with a little more understanding now. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field, which the Lord power had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, have the Most High said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden. Verse 2, and the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, the Most High have said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die, for the Most High knoweth in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. So in this time frame, all right, the serpent was the so-called white man. It was not a serpent, a physical, literal serpent that had the wisdom to talk or communicate with this woman, man. This was the actual so-called white man. And this characteristic of the so-called white man rings true today. How do we know that? Because the Lord have laws and statutes and commandments set up. For an example, Leviticus, the 20th chapter and 13th verse. Matter of fact, let me get that. Let me get that real quick, all right? This is Leviticus 20 and 13. If a man also lie with mankind, as he lieth with a woman, all right, homosexuality, both of them have committed an abomination, they shall surely be put to death, their blood shall be upon them. So the so-called white man know about this law. And you can't tell me he don't know about it, because in all his courthouses and when he swear in his presidents, they do it on the Bible, man. All right? But what did the so-called white man do? The so-called white man wrote laws to protect homosexuals. So that's a sign to show you that this serpent, all right, verse 4, 3 and 4, and the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. Well, that means he's contrary to the Most High, man, which this serpent is the so-called white man today. All right? It's well documented, outlined in the scriptures that the Lord said put homosexuals to death. All right? But here it is, the so-called white man celebrate homosexuality, man. That's the same spirit that was in the serpent that's back today. All right? For more proof of that, well, let me get the book of Isaiah. Chapter 10 and verse 1, Woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees and that write grievousness which they have prescribed. Right, and what's those unrighteous decrees? You got laws, certain laws set up to protect homosexuals when the Lord have already established his law dealing with homosexuals, man. So the serpent, that same spirit, is in the so-called white man today. That's what he was known as in those times, as the serpent. And his spirit is not upright in him. That same spirit is carrying on today. And this is not like, once again, for all you people, you know, who read the Genesis, the 3rd chapter, literal, well, this is not literal, all right? This is no more than a person that, you know, is not becoming of being honest. You know, well, you'll tag him with a certain word. You'll say, oh, he's a snake. There's no difference than what the Bible is saying, man. The so-called white man is known as a snake and a serpent, man. All right? And even amongst the natives, they call him the great serpent, man. All right? That's all it is, man. It's a title, all right, being put on him to describe his character. Matter of fact, this is the book of Salaki, God, man. Book of Psalms, chapter 58, start at verse 3. The wicked are estranged from the womb. They go astray as soon as they be born, speaking lies. And this is dealing with the so-called white man, all right? Which this is twofold, you know, is actually talking about when they come out of the womb that they are, you know, they wicked, you know. But this is also talking about as soon as they was birthed as a nation, you know, as soon as they was birthed into power, they came right out speaking lies, man. When they came over to the natives, they came crouching, you know, and claiming to come in peace, but they slaughtered the Native Americans and took their land, man. All right? Verse 4, their poison is like the poison of a serpent. So you see, well, this is not actually talking about a literal serpent. When you go back to Genesis, this is more proof to prove that the Bible actually described people as animals. All right? That's why the Lord called his chosen people sheep. Do that literally mean the Lord is going to come back and deliver a bunch of sheep from a pasture, man? No. All right? So again, it says their poison is like the poison of a serpent. They are like the deaf adder that stoppeth the ear. That's right, which means what I just read, when the Lord put out laws and tell them what order to go into, they stop up their ear. They don't want to hear righteousness. You know, they do what the hell they want to do. Verse 5, which will not hearken to the voice of charmers, charming never so wisely. And those charmers is us, the men that you see that's condemning this place and telling the so-called white man that they're wicked, all right? But they're not going to hearken to us, you know, even though we charming them. So this is an example of the scripture describing a certain people, which are the wicked, as snakes and serpents, not meaning that these are, the Lord is actually calling a serpent literally wicked. No. It's talking about the so-called white man, all right? This is the book of Revelation, chapter 12. And verse 9. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil. Let's read this again. And that dragon was cast out, that old serpent. All right? What old serpent? Well, the serpent that we just read about in Genesis, the 3rd chapter. This is the same old red dragon. All right? Because the serpent and the dragon is a reptile. But in the New Testament, he's referred to as a dragon. So again, it says, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, all right, the serpent of the Old Testament, called the devil, which when you go into that word devil, it means deceiver, man. Which that what the so-called white man did to seize the planet. He deceived the whole planet, man. To seize control of the whole planet, the so-called white man, one of his attributes was the power of deception, which that what that word devil mean. You know, these so-called pastors that have you think that when you hear that word devil, you think of a man in a red spandex suit, man, with a triton in his hand, you know, waiting to possess your soul forever and ever, which that's a cunningly devised fable, all right? And the so-called white man wants you to keep believing that shit, all right? Because he knows that this Bible is parable and is allegorically speaking about him, all right? So it says, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil, and Satan. And that word Satan means adversary, which the so-called white man is the adversary to everything, not just the Israelites, you know, you so-called blacks, Latinos, all right? But this man is the adversary to the water, all right? The oceans is polluted, you know? The animals, certain animals facing extinction. That's why he's known as the Satan, the great Satan, or the great adversary. He's the adversaries to the trees, all right? The water supply, these chemtrails in the air, the food, GMOs. May I go on and on, the ozone layer, man, all right? So it says, which deceiveth the whole world, he was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Yeah, and a lot of people believe that this talking about one day the spiritual being Satan, which there is a spiritual being Satan, but he's in order. When you read Job, 1st chapter, starting at around the 5th or 6th verse, where the spiritual being Satan, he's in order. He followed the orders of the Lord. So a lot of people like to equate this to, You know, the spiritual being Satan, like one day him and he took angels with him and they, you know, came up against the Lord. All right, they had a coup. All right, so the scripture, this is dealing with the dragon. All right, so is this a literal dragon one day that's going to come out of the pits of hell? Well, let's find out. This is the book of Psalms, chapter 44, verse 19. Though thou hast sore broken us in the place of dragons and cover us with the shadow of death. All right, this is talking about America, man. Again, let's read. This is Psalms 44:19. Though thou hast sore broken us in the place of dragons and covered us with the shadow of death. With the shadow of death is here in America, and the place of dragons is America, man. And the dragons is who? The so-called white man, all right? And this scripture makes more sense when you go back in history. A lot of so-called Negroes don't go and do no history, man. You just put everything in a snapshot moment, you know, a moment in time. You don't go back into the history. If you go back to the history, it's clear who your enemies are, man. When they was hanging your forefathers from trees and castrating them, separating families. Well, that's what this scripture is talking about. The Lord broken us in the place of dragons. So literally, is there ever a time in history where the Lord's people went to a place that was surrounded with dragons? No. Again, it's proven that the so-called white man is the serpent and the dragon, man. These are symbols when describing the so-called white man, all right? For further proof of that, well, this is the book of Ezekiel, chapter 29. And I start at verse 2. Son of man, set thy face against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and prophesy against him and against all Egypt. Now, we know clearly this is not talking about the Egypt in the time of Moses, because this is Ezekiel the prophet, all right? And Ezekiel the prophet came well after Moses. So what Egypt is he talking about? He's talking about America, man. And if you want to refute that, well, pull out a dollar bill and ask yourself why in the hell there's a pyramid on it, all right? Because Egypt simply means bondage. So America in the Bible is known as Egypt as well. Remember, the Lord wrote everything in a parable. Verse 3, speak and say, thus saith the Lord power, behold, Salaki. Speak and say, thus saith the Lord power, behold, I am against thee, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great dragon that lieth in the midst of his rivers, which have said, my river is mine own, and I have made it for myself. So again, it says, speak and say, thus saith the Lord power, behold, I am against thee, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, which is dealing with these bankers. The international bankers is the modern day pharaohs, all right? The Illuminati, these Rothschilds and Gettys, DuPonts, Fitzgeralds, Oppenheimers, well, these are the modern day pharaohs. Egypt is modern day America. And it says, the great dragon that lieth in the midst of its rivers. Yeah, so that's the point, man. The dragon that you read about in Revelation and the serpent that you read about in Genesis, the 3rd chapter, is symbols or symbolic when referring to the so-called white man. So with that, shalom.